Are we leaving this?
You can press the power button on the speaker and turn that off.
And where is that at?
Speaker.
Oh, gotcha. I mean, I'm fine with leaving it like this.
No,
Or, yeah.
it'll feedback.
I got you. Thank you. So good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
How you doing, Josh?
Coming through clear. Good. Good. I'm excited about today. This will be good.
Me too. I think I see a live button up here. So I guess Benjamin went ahead and hit the button. It's not quite 10 o'clock. But if anybody's watching, hi, guys. Good to see you. Glad that you're here. We're not going to start the broadcast as always. We're going to wait till 10 o'clock on the dot to start. So Josh and I are just going to chat a little bit. And I literally, I mean, he's just bringing me stuff right now. I literally just walked in the door. The Nashville traffic was crazy. We had rain coming down. We had cars going everywhere. And then my little map program said exit here. And I said, that's the wrong exit. But it did help me to avoid a traffic accident. So, man, if I had stayed on normal course, I probably still wouldn't be here. So thank goodness for technology, right? I mean, sometimes it works. Sometimes it also puts me in the middle of a cornfield out in God's country. But so, Josh, what's going on with you? How you been?
I've been doing really well. Just keeping busy. Got back from that ACTS conference where we saw each other in Nashville. That was exciting and just nice to be home and get back to the ordinary work, right?
In the normal routine of things, right? Yeah, it's fun to be gone sometimes, but these days at this point in my life, I'm always anxious to go home. There's no place like home, right? And
Yes.
and so people say, man, it must be fun traveling. No, it's work. You see a hotel room and you just want to long for home. So yeah, we did get to see each other at the ACTS conference, and I was glad to see you there. And boy, that's one of the reasons I reached out to you for this one. People kept coming up to me and said, "Who's this Josh guy? I mean, he's really good." And it was informative, and we really loved it. And I said, "Well, let's get him on here for even yet a bigger audience." And so we're excited to have you on today. So you were in Nashville for the ACTS conference, and boy, that was a good time. Where are you headed next? What's your travels going to take you?
Next travel I have is actually really small. I'm going to just drive over the mountains. I'm in Western Colorado. So I'm going to drive over the mountains to the Front Range, the Denver, Colorado Springs area. And I'm taking a class for a review designation. So that'll be nice. And that'll just be a few days, easy traveling. I'm not planning to take a plane, just simple driving and enjoy the drive. And then I think after that, what am I doing? I've got a couple meetings. Where is it now? I think there's one in Reston that I'll be attending, where it's groups of appraisers and lenders and AMCs and regulators, and that's the Collateral Risk Network. I'll be going there. I chair a committee there, so that'll be good to meet up. And then there's an NAA conference, the summit, the appraisal summit, and that's, boy, when is that? I don't even remember now.
September? Is that in September?
Yeah, I think it's in September. Yeah, and so that'll be in Vegas. That'll be nice to meet up with a lot of folks at NAA and good education and good presenters and speakers. So I'm looking forward to that.
Right, and then we follow that up with next spring. The ACTS is coming back, and we're going to be in Salt Lake City. So how exciting is that?
I'm thrilled for that, and that's close. That's in our neck of the woods. I think hopefully we'll be able to get some Colorado appraisers who maybe don't attend some national conferences, get them to drive over.
Right. And guys, those that are in early and viewing this broadcast right now, again, we're going to start the official broadcast at 10 o'clock. Josh and I are just catching up here a little bit. If you've never had a chance to come to an appraisal conference, I recommend you go. I mean, the cool thing about it is you hear speakers a variety of speakers. I mean, we had Jim Park, we had John Brennan, we had Tim Anderson. We had a lot of folks from all over the country. Not only that, you have appraisers from all over the country. I taught a USPAP update class the day before the conference, and I had 2 appraisers from Hawaii in my class. I had appraisers from Texas. I had them from all Salt Lake City or Utah. I don't know if it was Salt Lake. But so if you haven't been to a conference, I highly, highly, highly recommend you go. Boy, listen, I was in class yesterday down in Memphis, and I was telling everybody about our little conference here in Nashville with the NAA, and Appraisal eLearning helped put that on. So we're thankful to both those organizations for a fantastic first conference. And I told them, I said, listen, right before I lectured, I guess they thought they had to butter them up. I said, not only did they provide breakfast and they provided lunch, on the breaks you had coffee or soda or cookies, and the day before they had a welcome reception. I said, but get this, the very last break on the second day, they had beer and wine and wings and pretzels and nachos. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And so the general consensus is, hey, you keep giving us beer and wine on the breaks, and come back every year.
Oh, yes.
Every year. So I don't know, maybe we need to talk to John Dingman on that.
Yeah, I was
Jim
really
McLeod.
surprised at that. That was excellent. That was it was all people could talk about for that last session before we quieted down.
Yeah, it was a great conference, guys, and those viewing, if you have not been to one, do yourself a favor and come check out one of the conferences. The Appraisal Summit is the fall, and then we have the new conference actually called ACS. The first one, the premiere, was here in Nashville, Tennessee, and certainly the next one is coming up next spring in Salt Lake City. So we hope to see a few of you there. Come on out. Well, Josh, we've got just about a minute before we kick off. So I'm excited that you're here. Any earth-shattering news? I heard something the other day from the ASC made a decision, I think, on.
Oh, yeah, about that TriStar Bank appraiser waiver. Yeah, no, that was excellent news. I mean,
for the appraisers.
Yes, yeah. I think this was a real excellent demonstration of, the bank was following procedures. They put in this request. And then appraiser groups, and not even just appraiser groups. I mean, we saw comment letters in there from NAR, National Association of Realtors, all different groups. I mean, it was just, saying, look, this is not a good idea, and we're not actually sure that they have proven the scarcity of appraisers, and that the scarcity has then led to delays, because that was really the only measure the ASC had to go by. Is there a scarcity, and did it lead to delays? And I don't think there was evidence to show it. So
absolutely,
this was such good news for appraisers.
It's fantastic news. And if appraisers aren't aware of what we're talking about, Google it. TriStar Bank request from the appraisal subcommittee to get a waiver. And if that had went through, then they wouldn't have to get appraisals done by certified or licensed appraisers for the entire year of 2018. And other banks were going to follow suit on that. So yay for appraisers, and thank you to Jim Park and his team for making what I feel is the correct decision. And thank you to all the appraisers that got involved. Many appraisers did get involved. And guys, this is just a testament that if you get involved, you can make a difference, because I think the appraisers getting involved certainly helped. I have 10 o'clock on the nose, so let's get rolling with the subject matter at hand. Good morning, everybody. I'm Bryan Reynolds with Appraisal eLearning, and this is the Appraisal Report webinar. I'm super excited today to have you here, and also my good friend Josh Walitt. He was at the ACS conference, and he gave a presentation, and boy, people keep coming up to me and really talking about it. So I thought it would be really wonderful if we could grab Josh in for an hour today, and maybe not go over the entire presentation, but certainly some of the things he covered, and give some insight to appraisers in what's going on after your client gets the report. And so, Josh, if you don't mind, why don't you introduce yourself to our viewers and maybe give your contact information if you don't mind?
Certainly, certainly. Yeah, well, I'm a certified residential real estate appraiser. I do reviews. I'm an educator. I design courses. I've actually designed a course for Appraiser eLearning, as a matter of fact. I'm the compliance manager for Property Interlink. So we're a national appraisal firm and appraisal management company. I handle procedures, training, licensing, audit issues, oversee the review functions. And really, my goal is always to sort of increase efficiency, and this came from my appraiser background, through using good methods, good techniques, and technology to the point that I can still remain in control as the human. And that's really just my basic background. I'm involved in the National Association of Appraisers. I have my certified distance education instructor certificate, and I'm actually on the board for the NAA, for the National Association of Appraisers. So I like to stay involved in state and national issues, and I'm just really excited to be here today.
Fantastic. Well, Josh, thank you very, very much for being on the show today. I know that you're a very busy guy and you got a lot going on, and of course you're not getting paid to be here. So I'm glad you're here. Hey, and by the way, for our viewers, because most of them probably don't know, I want to just say congratulations to you. You went through a pretty intense training session, and so now you're an AQB certified USPAP instructor. Yes,
I am. I'm excited to be. Yeah, I went through that training. Finally got the results back. We were all sitting on the edge of our seats for a couple of weeks, and we got the news back. So happy to be one.
Yeah, congratulations, guys. That's no small feat. Listen, I'm not that bright. I tell folks all the time, thank God appraising isn't hard, because I wouldn't be able to do it. But that's the hardest test I've ever had in my career. I mean, it was intense. Luckily, I passed the first time, but it's the only test normally you take a test and you leave the room and you think, gosh, I bombed out on that, or hey, I aced that thing. This was the test that you have no idea. And
Yes.
and most of us were like, well, I'll see you at Boca Raton for the makeup test.
Right.
We knew,
Yeah.
I mean, our pass ratio was 30%. We knew only 30% were going to pass. So it's quite intense. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah. We left the room. I think there was like 2.5 or 3 hours to take it. There were some people who finished pretty early on. I was there till the last half hour, double checking and rethinking and probably overthinking some of my answers. And we left the room and we were all saying, okay, well, I guess we need to watch for the email that tells us where the backup test, the second test is, because I need to retake it. And luckily, and actually, I heard that this particular class had, I think, if I'm remembering right, a 60% pass ratio. So we had a little better results than maybe your class there, but still very difficult. As an adult, in my adult life, taking tests, I have never felt so down after I took a test.
One of my new instructors, he just experienced that as well, and he had the same emotion that you went through. He called and said, Bryan, I don't have any idea. I thought I was prepared. I thought I've studied. I thought I had a pretty good understanding. But boy, that was tough. And it probably should be tough. That's a big deal. And but I did want to take a second to congratulate you on that, because that's no small feat. I would like to remind our viewers, before we get much further into this broadcast, as all broadcasts, is being recorded. So if you get a call, if you've got to go out and show a property, you got to inspect a property, whatever you've got to do, and you can only see a portion of this, rest assured it is being recorded. You can check us out on the YouTube channel and see the rest of the broadcast, as any of the prior broadcasts are available to you. And that being said, while you're on that channel, go ahead and hit subscribe. Heck, do it right now, because that's going to kind of keep you in the know. It's going to let you know when we have broadcasts. And every once in a while, we'll have a special webinar that's not one of our regularly scheduled webinars. Like Jim Park has indicated that he might be willing to come on. And so we hope to have him on very soon and talk about some stuff with the ASC. So go ahead and hit subscribe now, and then you'll be in the know. So let's go ahead and get started. Josh, let's just take this, and you can take it wherever you want to. The nice thing about these webinars is it's very informal, ladies and gentlemen. We don't have a script that we're going by. We didn't write questions or have people write questions in advance. We will encourage you to ask questions during the broadcast. We'll get to hopefully all of them, but as many as we can. So let's just chat here. I'm an appraiser. I'm out in the field. I look at a property. I do what I think to be a really good job. Maybe it was a complex property and hence a complex assignment. I don't know. And I send the report in. What happens next? I mean, how many eyes look at this report?
Yeah, I mean, and that's that I get that a lot, because a lot of the time, as a fee appraiser, I know my experience was, I know what goes on up until the point I deliver it, and then sometimes I'm going to get revision requests back, and that's really my only kind of knowledge of, well, what's going on behind the scenes. And so what the sort of gist of the presentation was what is going on days after, months after, even years after, because sometimes you get the report back or issues related to that report. It could be 3 years, it could be 4 years, could be more. And so there, as far as the number of eyes, in the short term, you might get 2, 3, 4, 5 people looking at it. Once you say, okay, it's going to an appraisal department, or maybe it's an AMC, whether it's AMC or internal appraisal department, doesn't really matter. There's going to be someone screening it. They're going to be doing some sort of review on it, quality control on it. Maybe it's automated, maybe it's semi-automated to sort of assist them to take a look at some red flags. Then it's going to get to the underwriter. It might get to a risk manager. It might get to an underwriting supervisor or manager. So there's a lot of different eyes looking at it. Hopefully, there are some protocols so that you're not getting 5 revision requests on the same report, right? From every person, right? Maybe it's cumulative. This person wonders this person wonders this. But what I really loved about the group at ACT was the appraisers were really open to hearing that difference in perspective. And that was really what the presentation was about. It was about having this other perspective from your user's standpoint, because we're writing appraisal reports, we're performing the appraisal and writing the report for our intended user. And so when we have an underwriter looking at it, we need to have written the report so that they have the chance to understand it, right? So it's from their perspective. And the appraisers there it was a really positive back and forth. It was a 2-hour presentation actually, and there were a lot of good questions and answers during it from the participants, from the attendees. And we were talking about quality control. We were talking about revision requests, of course, that came up. But we were also talking about those long-term issues like buybacks and panel management. How are people being reviewed? Because then we're talking about a totally different set of eyes, maybe. They're looking at maybe some scores. They're maybe looking at some red flags that are raised, and then they're looking at an appraiser's performance overall. And this is not just in the AMC realm, but lenders are required to take a look at every report that comes in. And so they can't, it's not like 10, 15 years ago, these sort of old days, so to speak, where they just sort of say, okay, I received the appraisal, now let's push it through. Okay, here's the number, let's push it through. And they are required. I mean, you take a look at Fannie Mae Selling Guide, there's a review, certain level of review necessary for every appraisal. So you have all these eyes looking at it. And then you have also mandatory reporting. Lenders are required. And so I touched on that a little bit. I get questions from appraisers sometimes, when is a lender required to turn me into the state, or an AMC, when are they required to turn me into the state, and so on. And so you take a look at different federal and state regulations. And so we got into that a little bit.
Yeah. When that came out, the Wall Street Reform Consumer Protection Act, commonly known as Dodd-Frank, and they changed it. They revised it a little bit to make it a little nicer. but folks, the lending community has an obligation. If they think you violated USPEP, now that has a material failure to comply, I believe is the terms they use, they are required to send that over to the state regulatory agency. They don't have a choice. So we as appraisers, I know there's this love-hate relationship, And I think it used to be a love-hate relationship with underwriters, right? Or maybe if we go back even further, it was a love-hate relationship with real estate agents, right? And then we focused, now we hate underwriters and underwriters hate us. And now maybe it's we hate AMCs and they hate us, right? So we all got to figure out a way to get along because we're in this game and nobody's going away, right? So I guess the question, I know that when I've had processors or reviewers or somebody want a particular issue, and I push back on that, it seems to me if I ever have the opportunity to get to the underwriter, they're not really horrible people. I mean, they've got a job to do and they're trying to do their job. And I can have a conversation with an underwriter, and normally we can come to some sort of resolution. I think a lot of the appraisers out there and the ones watching get really frustrated, Josh, when you have somebody that maybe doesn't have proper training and they don't understand really the appraisal process or the economic principles or USPEP, and they've got maybe a checklist, or at least this is what appraisers think. I mean, we really don't know. But they think there's a guy or gal in a cubicle and they've got this checkbox to look at your report. And if your report doesn't meet that, they call. And I hear people in live classes all the time. I get this dumb revision request, or what they asked me to do is stupid. Right. And so while I think some of that goes on, what I like to get from you today is the perspective on the other side, right? Because appraisers need to step up their game, guys. I have chief appraisers and reviewers all the time call me and say, I think I'm going to have to file a complaint against this guy because he didn't put his support and rationale for highest and best use in, and he's saying he doesn't have to do it. I said, use this as a learning opportunity. Show them standards rule 22A, Roman numeral 10. It's right there, folks. Yeah, you got to do it, right? So all revision requests or all calls aren't always, invalid. I'm trying to say. So give me some thoughts and ideas of what the other side sees with some of this stuff.
No, you bring up a couple of different good issues there. And first, let me start out by saying I talk to people about echo chamber syndrome. Okay, so it's really easy to fall into the trap where, as a reviewer, you're being escalated, let's say within a lender or with an AMC, you're being escalated the problems, the complex reports. Maybe there's not a problem in the report. Maybe it's just complex. You're being escalated those. So you're always seeing complexities. You're always seeing perhaps some issues and correction needs and errors and problems. And maybe some of those are legitimate issues, right? But it's really easy to just constantly be talking about that and only seeing those. And then what happens is there's a perception that every appraisal report is bad, right? And that's not true. Many appraisal reports go through with no problem at all. And on the flip side, there's a perception that every underwriter is evil because I get revision requests. And what we need to do, I think, and I try to do in my everyday work or when I'm working with underwriters, I train or present to underwriters and present to appraisers, is let's take an honest look at our own work, right? Before we start to say, this is really bad. And I did this for myself as an appraiser. There was a point in time where I had to make a decision. Why am I getting so many revision requests? Well, a lot of it was for lending, and I was getting some of the same revision requests over and over. So I had to take an honest look at my own work and say, you know what? What am I missing? Because this is for the same intended use. These people are asking the same questions. So I need to be putting this information in because I am writing for intended use and for my intended user. So I need to put that in there. So those are just a few of my thoughts. From the perspective of the underwriter, I think it's really key to just as we as appraisers are required to sort of justify what we're doing, right? We need that work file backup. We have the research, we have the support, we have everything supporting our analyses, our conclusions, our opinions. They have to do the same thing. And the valuation piece is really just a small part. So they say, okay, here's the appraisal. I need to understand it. I also need to understand income. I need to understand their job history. I need to understand their credit score. All these pieces. And when they look at that as a whole, they have to justify their decision in the end. So if they are wondering something, it's not usually off of a checklist, although I know there's a perception that there are checklists for underwriters. There are checklists. Yes, there are checklists for the first level screening, for reviews and things like this. But certainly there are requirements that, according to Fannie Mae Selling Guide or the HUD Handbook, depending on the type of financing, it's black and white. It needs to have X, or it needs to have Y, or it needs to have Z. So it needs to have components. Checklist certainly is suitable for some of those. But in the end, what underwriters are trying to answer is, do I understand the basis for the value and for the marketability? And if they are not comfortable answering yes, then they may be asking for additional clarification. And going back to the sort of stepping back and looking at our own work honestly, I had to really I had a moment where I had to say, you know what, I'm not sure I really am explaining things. I'm just sort of restating things. Like I made a $12,000 adjustment for garage. That's not explaining anything. So people sometimes have this belief that, hey, I've explained myself, but maybe they really haven't. And it goes to logic. Have you expressed your logic? Why does what you did make sense? And the underwriter not understanding the appraisal process, I would actually argue that there's not anything really wrong with that. They're going to have some basis in valuation. They need to have some sort of background, but we need to understand we're not writing for an appraiser, right? We're writing for our intended user. We're writing for an underwriter, a risk manager. Just like if we were writing for an attorney for private work, we're writing for an attorney. Many attorneys, in fact, don't have a basis in appraisals. And so we do need to keep that in mind. I'm never telling people to write a novel. You probably don't need 2 and 3 legal pages of verbiage on your reports, but sometimes 3, 4 sentences, 10 sentences, 15 or 20 sentences as it gets more complex. That may be all it takes to really spill a little bit of this, a little bit of the thinking, the logic, the rationale onto the paper. And I was able, in my own experience, to get to the point where I was explaining things, the common questions that I got, and I got maybe 0 to 3 revision requests each month, and that really helped boost my efficiency and my ability to really satisfy my customers and be able to show them that I'm writing a report that explains what they need to know. I mean, that's basically what it came down to.
I think we as appraisers were kind of guilty at times that, I mean, hey, I know what I did. I know exactly what I did. And I know why I did it in that particular manner and why I made that $12,000 adjustment for car storage. But when I go back and look at it, I realize, while I know what I did, it's up here in my head. I really didn't do a good job communicating that. And I think it all depends on who your client intended users are. If my client is a homeowner, I mean, do they really need a picture of their own house, for crying out loud? They know what it looks like, or a floor plan or something like that. But if my client and additional intended users are a bank, I mean, we're kind of the eyes and ears, and we need to report that, and we need to be good communicators. So let's get into some specifics here. What are some of the number one issues that we, and this would be immediate. I know at the onset of this, we talked about what happens after the delivery, the day, the week, maybe months, maybe years. And I don't want to forget that later in the broadcast. I want to come back and say, you really are calling me on something I did 3 years ago. Right. So I want to get back to that. Don't let me forget. But on the onset, when I hit the send button, okay, what are some of the most common issues that you guys are seeing that you've got to send it back to appraisers?
Yeah, I think from our own company and then from talking with underwriters, it's kind of consistency of data. That's or contradictory data, contradictory information in the report. Some of that is fueled by CU, the collateral underwriter system, where it's comparing your work to your own work in some cases. It's saying, hey, on a previous report, you said this about this comp. And it's also comparing your work to other appraisers' work. So what's important, what I tell people is it's important to remember, like when I train reviewers or screeners or underwriters, I'm saying these types of automated reports doesn't mean the appraisal report is wrong. It means it is raising a red flag for you to evaluate. So is there one possible error that this has raised, or are there 10? And does it affect multiple comps? So we're looking at risk. Okay, wait, it pointed out one thing that might be wrong, but everything else is not being questioned. So I can look at the reliability overall of the report. We're looking at the criteria for comp selection. A lot of the time, there might be something outside of the subdivision. Maybe there's something miles away. Look, I worked in rural and remote areas. I'm talking 20, 30, 50 miles away. I'm using comps that were 3, 4, 5 years old sometimes in very complex assignments. So there's nothing wrong with using these old, distant comps. But even when you go outside the subdivision, you're a few miles away, you're using that 8, 9, 10-month-old comp, explaining why are these the best that are available, right? And that might take 1 or 2 sentences to explain, hey, what was the criteria that I used for selecting these? Why this one that has a large adjustment? And it really sitting yourself down and saying, if I didn't know anything about this assignment, what would I be asking about this report, right? Just sort of logical, right? Adjustments with no explanation, sharing the logic. Why do you think this is a logical adjustment? Of course they're rounded. Of course they're estimates based on the data, but not just saying I used X, Y, Z, A, B, or C methods, right? Just talking about, hey, this is large. Why do I believe it's correct? What data do I have that really suggests this is a reasonable, logical estimate? And then bracketing, of course, bracketing isn't required, but if you don't require one of the main characteristics, or if you don't bracket one of those main characteristics, underwriters are often seeing as a problem, there's no explanation for it, right? If you don't have that upper end or lower end of whatever characteristic, first of all, they're worried about marketability. Is this really a marketable property if we're talking about some of the main characteristics? And then also, believe it or not, that's support for your adjustments, right? It's showing that you are closing in and you're tightening up that gap based on characteristics that are bracketing it. And then finally, I think one of the top would be market support. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, lenders really have a lot of data. They have a lot of reports. They have a lot of indexes and graphs and whatnot showing them, hey, what's going on in certain markets. And so when someone fills in the MC form and then says it's not reliable and they check a box on page 1, but there's not really an explanation of how they came to the stable conclusion, and the lender is showing this has been increasing 1% a month for a year. So now they're left with, do I really understand what's going on in this market? And sometimes their answer is no.
Right. You know, I mean, you touched on several things here, and I was an investigator for a while, and now I actually help appraisers that get in trouble, try and get them out of trouble. And let me qualify that. If you've done something wrong and you know you did something wrong and you're out there reckless behavior, I don't want to help you. I want them to throw the book at you. So don't call me. But we all make mistakes, right? And so a lot of things that I've seen, I'll echo what you've said, is contradictory statements within the report itself. I mean, sometimes we're our own worst enemy, right? And so we'll see an appraisal report sometime that on one page, it'll say the exposure time is 3 months. And then you'll see on another page says the exposure time is 7 months. And then on another page, you'll say, my opinion of exposure time is 30 days. Well, which is it? I mean, you're entitled to your opinion based on an analysis of market activity, but don't give me contradictory statements like that. I mean, you're kind of condemning yourself, if you will. So let me ask you this. If an appraiser's out there watching, and Josh, I think that all of us, if we get a valid request, right? Hey, why did you do this? And we look back at our report and we say, oh gosh, what was I thinking that day? Here, let me fix that for you. Right? We're all guilty of that. We have to accept responsibility for our actions. However, there are times when we will really get a stupid revision request. I'm just going to call it like it is, right?
Okay.
And we may push back and call back to that, whoever our contact is, processor, whoever it is at the AMC or with our client. We say, this is ridiculous. And there's kind of a little battle going on here. If we in our heart really think that this is an unreasonable request, one thing I tell appraisers to do is familiarize yourself with the Fannie Mae guidelines. You can go right to efanniemae.com, and they're right there, guys.
Yes.
And what better support is for you to use your little snipping tool and snip that guideline out and send it right back in support of your position. Or go over to HUD.gov and grab the Appraisal Report and Data Delivery Guide or the 4000.1 and copy and paste that. You were just talking about bracketing. And in the HUD handbook, it says that you should use bracketing when possible and appropriate.
Right.
So if I'm appraising a house over in Thoroughbred Acres where I live, and it's the Gulfstream model. The Gulfstream is 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,595 square feet. That's the house. They're all built by Thompson Homes. And I'm appraising one today, and there were 8 Gulfstreams that sold over the last 12 months. What? I mean, it's the same house, right? Why in the world would you bracket GLA? I've got 8 sales that are all 1,595 square feet. And so appraisers, please don't go out there and say, oh, I got a bracket GLA. No, you don't. That certainly wouldn't be appropriate in this case. So let's say that's the example. I've got one of those, and I have a processor or somebody calling back and say, Bryan, you didn't bracket GLA. Okay. So, well, no, I didn't bracket GLA because that defies common sense. I've got the same house 8 times. They're all 1,595 square feet. They are the best comparable sales for this subject property. What can I do as a practicing appraiser? I mean, what's the process? Should I try and keep going to find a supervisor, a manager, the chief appraiser at that facility? Because it seems like when I get a chief appraiser or someone that has some knowledge about what we're doing here, we could normally come to an understanding. I mean, what would be your recommendation for the appraiser if we do have a request that we feel we shouldn't just do something to make our client happy, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I like your idea of escalating it, saying, can I talk to the supervisor? Can I talk to your manager? Can I talk to the chief appraiser? I don't know if there's always a reason to jump to that. And I don't think you're suggesting always jump to that, because what I would do is first message them and explain your logic. Say, look, it's not required by the Fannie Mae Selling Guide. It's not required by the HUD handbook. It's not required by industry texts that talk about sales comparison approach. It's these are identical, or share whatever the logic is depending on that characteristic. And what I would do, and what I successfully did, was I would then send that as a message, say, I can add this type of comment to my report. And this is, I'm not going to add a comp because I don't believe it adds anything to it. It's not appropriate to just throw something in there. But these are the comments I'm going to put. I think one of the keys is always remain professional and calm. Unfortunately, there are bad apples on both sides, both sides. And it goes back to that sort of echo chamber syndrome where we think, well, then all parties must be jerks anytime, right? And that's not the case. But remain professional, just like you suggested, explain your rationale, and then revise your report and submit it. I think don't ever be, and this is a little maybe off the topic or off point of what you're getting at, but don't ever be snide, don't ever be rude, don't ever try to make jokes in the report or personally attack the person, anything like that, because it just undermines your own credibility, and it might make you feel good that moment, but it's not going to make you feel good later if people are questioning it. And also, don't write a book. I am 100% behind copying and pasting the request you get from the client into the report and then answering it succinctly. If you have to refer to other parts of your report and then add your additional clarification. But I think what that does is it helps hold everyone accountable for what they've done. So if it was a request that's a little bit inappropriate and does not quite comply with lending requirements or AMC requirements, then it helps to then justify, well, this is why I wasn't able to fulfill this entire request, and you can explain it. So being just totally transparent. And again, you don't need to write a book. Keep it simple, keep good headings so that people can find the information quickly. But yeah, if you then still get resistance, go to the chief appraiser and say, look, this is what I'm faced with, and understand in the ACTS presentation at the conference, we talked about what is a lender or AMC allowed to ask you to do, okay? Because I've run into cases where I hear stories, the underwriter, maybe we're talking about bad apples, right? Underwriter bypasses their appraisal department, calls up the appraiser and says, hey, we need you to remove this large adjustment that's too large. And then if the appraiser does it, that's not good. But even if the appraiser doesn't do it, we still have a possible violation of valuation independence requirements and rules, because they cannot instruct the appraiser on how to go forth with their appraisal. They can ask them for corrections. They can ask them for clarifications and additional support and explanations, and they can ask them to consider additional appropriate information like additional sales. Now, it's not saying that it should be 20 sales. Probably it's limited to 2 or 3, maybe 4 sales. And there needs to be some sort of legitimate, appropriate reason why an appraiser should be considering those other sales, right? But that's pretty limited. It allows for a lot of revision requests if they have questions, but it's pretty limited. They can't tell you how to, you need to add this comp or you need to take out this adjustment and things like that. So first off, before you even handle a revision, you need to understand what are they allowed to ask you by law, and then you also need to make a business decision. There are some times when you're going to get a revision on every single assignment from a particular client. You need to have one of those honest looks at your own work. Is it your work or is it the client? And maybe you need to make a business decision there.
Right. I know for crying out loud, I believe we're all guilty of this. I've got some old reports out there. I'd kind of like to have them back. It's like, what was I thinking, right?
None of us are perfect.
So we all make mistakes, and that's okay. And then to echo something else you just said, I remember one time I did an appraisal, and the client called me back and said, hey, Bryan, your adjustment for comparable sale number 3 car storage is too excessive. And so we want you to reduce that adjustment. And then your, whatever the others were, on comp 2, your view adjustment was excessive or too low or what, we don't understand it. So just take that one out, but it's okay because you appraise the property for more than the sale price. So here's what we wanted to do. Take out the adjustment for number 2, reduce the amount of the adjustment for car storage for sale number 3, and then just bring it in right at the sale price. And we're all happy. Everything's good. And my response to that was, hey, when you asked me for my opinion, I gave you my opinion. If you want it that way, that's no longer my independent opinion. That's your opinion. You signed the report. Here's what I'm willing to do. I'm not going to do that, but here's what I'm willing to do. If you want me to add an additional sale to further support my opinion, I'm happy to do that. But I'm not going to go back and put the adjustments you want in just to make it look pretty. So I think that's what we need to do as appraisers. And that's what I hear a lot of you saying. We do have some questions coming in, Josh. So if it's okay, we'll get to some of those. And I'd like to remind our viewers, if you have any questions for Josh, just type those in. They'll pop up to me and we will we'll get those answered for you during the broadcast. I'd also like to remind everybody, first of all, Josh, we're halfway through. So it's unbelievable how time flies, right? I think you've got some slides you want to share if we get to that. And so we'll allow you to do that if you want to do that.
Yeah, if it comes up, let's cover the questions, and,
sure.
and if the slides apply, I'll put them up. Otherwise, we don't need to.
Well, we are at the halfway mark, and I'd like to remind the viewers this is being brought to you by Appraisal eLearning. It is the Appraisal Report webinar. It's a free webinar that we host once a month, and we schedule that for the fourth Thursday of every month. So come back, check us out. And the best way to do that is just hit the subscribe button. So on the YouTube channel, what you're watching right now, you have the opportunity to subscribe, and we'd like for you to do that, keep you in the know. That being said, if there's somebody you'd like to see on this webinar, let us know. Or if you would like to be a guest on the webinar, we would encourage you to reach out to a member of the team, and we'll get you in the hot seat and answering some questions as well. So it's not really a hot seat. So let's get into some of our questions here, Josh, and I'll give you an opportunity. Great. Again, any appraisers watching, if you want to type in a question, feel free to do that. So here's a question. Are lenders and AMCs allowed to use one appraiser for one appraisal and then use another appraiser for 10 appraisals? Or do they need to use appraisers equally? Wait, what a great question. So that, you hear about you're on the approved list, but wait a minute, I'm getting one and this guy's getting all of them. So what's your thoughts on that, Josh?
Right. So yeah, sometimes there's this idea that it needs to be a round robin. Like you have a list of 10 appraisers, and you go to a number one, and then next one you go to number two, next three, and so on, right. And then you start the list over. And while that could be compliant with the various rules and laws, it wouldn't necessarily reflect what those rules and laws are trying to achieve, and what the industry requirements, like the AIR requirements of Freddie and Fannie, and when we also take a look at interagency appraisal and evaluation guidelines and so on, and when we take a look at different state requirements for AMCs, what it's coming down to is you need to look at the appraiser's performance, and that will speak to future work. So if you have an appraiser that is checking boxes, never explaining anything, including contradictory data from their own reports, including factually incorrect information. And so they're saying, you know what, I don't really think the quality of this work is quite as good. But this person over here, we never really have any questions. They add in those 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 sentences explaining some of the big deals. Maybe they rate them. Maybe they have like a numerical rating system. Maybe they have some sort of word rating system, whatever. And they say, you know what, we're going to be using them more, because when you take a look at those rules and regulations, the drive behind those is you need to look at quality. Mm-hmm. And people can argue, well, certain companies don't do that and this and that, and that's probably up for argument. But using every appraiser equally would probably indicate that they're not looking at quality. Gotcha. More than the opposite. So it really comes down to how have they done in the past, and sometimes it can even involve professionalism. Like, how are they to work with? What kinds of feedback is coming from homeowners? You want to look at, well, when's that feedback coming? Is it after the value report has been delivered, or is it before? Because right, we don't want that type of input tainted. But really, there are some folks who believe, hey, everyone should get equal work. But from any sort of business perspective or practical perspective, that doesn't really make sense. And it doesn't make sense in light of the regulations either.
Gotcha. Another question. Why is the underwriter insisting that I address secondary market requirements? They didn't list that as special requests, special items in the order. In other words, it wasn't an assignment condition. So why do they keep saying I have to adhere to secondary market requirements or guidelines?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we need to know, exactly what they mean by the secondary market. So is it some sort of special investor overlay now that they're coming back to because the lender wants to sell it to XYZ investor company that's going to buy that loan, and they say, oh my gosh, this investor requires 4 sales, right? Maybe that's just a requirement, but they didn't communicate that in the engagement letter, right? They just said, it's Fannie Mae, do it Fannie Mae requirements or whatever. So sometimes there are cases of, hey, they're asking for more than they ever communicated to me. I didn't know they require 2 listings, and I didn't see the need to include 2 listings or something like that. But what we want to be really careful of is when we read the engagement letter, and maybe it's a short engagement letter. There are still short engagement letters out there from some companies, right? And what they are doing is referencing requirements a lot of the time. So they'll say it needs to be done according to FHA standards, the HUD Handbook 4000.1 and the data entry guide. Okay. Well, that just included, hundreds of pages of requirements. Now, of course, it's not all sorts of unusual requirements. You can search for septic if it's a septic, and I want to make sure I do the correct analysis and reporting for that. But we need to be really careful that when they say it's FHA, all of a sudden those 3 letters on an engagement letter mean all of these requirements for FHA.
The FHA handbook is 1,009 pages.
Right.
Now, that's not.
But only some of it applies to appraisal.
Don't anybody have a heart attack? But
the same goes for the selling guide for Freddie Mac's servicing and selling guide. They have certain requirements if it's in a subdivision, for example. So maybe they include nothing in the subdivision. Maybe there's been no sales there. Maybe it's a perfectly legitimate situation where they had nothing from the subdivision to include. But what is required is you need to then explain why. Or maybe there were sales from the subdivision, they weren't included. Well, in that case, secondary market would say you should be putting them in unless there's some sort of really big reason for not. And then you'd explain it. So it's for whatever kind of financing, a lot of the time that's going to then direct you towards those referenced assignment conditions. And then, of course, the engagement letter may have some custom ones as well. So.
What's interesting is if we would all just take a minute, God forbid somebody take an educational offering because they want the education and not just the CE, right? We probably ought to do that once in a while, guys. There's no question, at least what I feel, that as an instructor, it's made me be a better appraiser because I have to be knowledgeable about these guidelines, and I don't know them inside and out. Nobody does. I was teaching a class yesterday, and you know what I kept doing? While I might have known the answer, I want to show them how they could find the answer. So I'd say, let's go to the authoritative source on this. And since it was an FHA related question, I said, let's go to HUD. So there's 2 documents. You got the 4000.1, the Appraisal Report and Data Delivery Guide. This is how you can find them. And yes, while that's 1,009 pages, guess what? There's a search function. So you can just type it in and search the entire document. Security bars, you want to know the position? Type in security bars. It'll take you that quick. Guys, Fannie Mae, the information is there. And we've got appraisers that have been doing this for a long, long time. And you'll throw something out and they look like you get that deer in the headlight look, right? They're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, let's look at the Fannie Mae guide. It's all right here. So I think that if we educate ourselves or try to familiarize ourselves a little bit better with these guidelines, it'll help everybody. And then that way, if you get a non-legitimate revision request, let's just call it that, right? You get a revision request, boy, that's the support you can have that says, let's have a conversation here because I don't see Fannie Mae guidelines saying that. And so let's have a conversation about that.
I think as you're looking for the question, I think, when you're on discussion groups, like on Facebook, appraiser discussion groups or LinkedIn groups, and people pose a question, hey, what do I need to do about appliances? Or what do I need to do about septic? And they get 90 different answers when really, and what I usually do is I say, HUD.gov, audiences, appraisers, 4000.1, use Control F. You need to go to what it says, not to what 90 people say online. So, and sorry for cutting in.
No, a fantastic point. And actually, the curriculum I was teaching yesterday, the book was printed a while back, and HUD's made some changes. So, I said, we've got to cross this out of the book because it's no longer accurate. When you're in a course and you've got a book there, a student book, is that the authoritative source? No. HUD.gov. And thank goodness they did publish a new book because, to look in several different places prior to that. mortgagee letters, the
Mhm.
Appendix D, the 4150, and you
Yeah.
got one place. You got two documents in one place where you can get your answer, right? So here's another question for you. Why does the underwriter keep coming back to me when I do this is interesting. When I do appraisal reviews, why does the underwriter always come back to me when I do an appraisal review requesting more detail? It's my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's important to remember the reason why a lender is ordering an appraisal review. Most of the time, and not all of the time, because sometimes an AMC might be ordering a short form type compliance review for state requirements. It's very, very limited scope. But typically, if they're ordering the pre-printed lending industry appraisal reviews, that lender is really interested in, okay, if you find a problem, tell me about it and tell me the correct information. And really the basis for that is in USPAP. So we look at appraisal review. Any report we're issuing needs to take into consideration the intended use and the intended user. So why are we doing this assignment for the lender, and what is going to help the lender or the underwriter or the risk manager have an understandable, a usable report in their hands? And so what happens, and actually I do have a few slides. As I talk, I'm gonna try to put those up.
Right.
But, yeah, when we take a look at some appraisal review examples, let me just click the button here. And I think we'll have that on our screen.
Yeah.
So here's an example. It says there were better comps, some with in-ground pools that were better indicators of value for the subject that should have been selected. And then down below, it has, it presumably here, it lists addresses and MLS numbers.
Okay.
So, but what is the reasoning for that disagreement? And so we really need to look at what's the scope of this review and what's required by USPAP in an appraisal review report. And even on the pre-printed, typically they say, look, you need to explain the reasoning behind your disagreement. And so this is not necessarily going to give that underwriter much of an understanding of why you're disagreeing. We know part of the rationale, it has to do with in-ground pools, but that's only for some of those new sales. So we actually don't know what about these sales that they've evidently listed makes them better, right? Because the underwriter already has questions about the work under review, presumably, unless it's totally just a random selection of a report to be sent out for review. And then they don't want more questions with the review. So I know people complain about fees. I'm not going to talk about fees. Do charge fees that are appropriate, but saying, well, the fee is so low, I can't explain anything. First of all, that's not a good reason. But also, again, no one's expecting a book, but a few sentences for your disagreement is going to help your intended user, your client. Sure. And it's also, if that ever gets caught up in getting to the state, it's a USPAP violation to not include the reasoning for your disagreement in the report. And then let's look at one other example. Sale 3 is not considered comparable. There were better sales from that neighborhood. Well, I can say you're wrong all day long. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean anything. That gives no context for someone to understand the reasoning for that disagreement. So that's, we in this case, we might actually end up asking for a revision request on the review report, and really trying to figure out which is more credible, which one is more worthy of belief, the original work under review or the appraisal review report. Remember, the underwriter is not trying to have a gotcha. And this really goes back to that gaining that perspective. And it was really productive at that conference where we were really sharing, this is what your user is thinking. The underwriter is trying to say, do I understand the value and the marketability? And if you're putting questions out there, but you're not explaining the reasoning, it actually makes more confusion for them. And say, so here, lot adjustments are inappropriate. There was plenty of land data to get good adjustments. Okay, well, but what is that data? What were the right adjustments, right? In what way were these not right? Data isn't lacking, so they acknowledge it's not lacking, but the final value is not supported. And then here we have, and I might even say on the previous one, they actually expressed an opinion of value. We could very easily argue because they cited the actual sales that they believed were comparable, but they didn't actually follow through, maybe you might argue correctly, with expressing that value. Here they express an opinion of the lot size, of the lot value, the site value. Have they met the requirements for disclosing the correct information for that? So we need to be really careful too when we think, hey, I'm doing a really good job reviewing this and I'm being very critical and I'm saying some of my own conclusions, but we need to be sure that we're using standards 3 and 4 for appraisal review, and that we're referencing back to standard 1 to make sure we're developing any of our conclusions and opinions properly. And we like to think of the appraisal, I don't know, just roll over here and get my USPAP. We like to think of, and I think you actually pointed it out at ACTS, we like to think of USPAP as this huge book, this thick book, but this is USPAP right here, this thin little part, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, we're talking about maybe 30 to 40 pages.
Right.
So it's an excellent checklist to make sure you're doing what's needed, but then always put yourself in that perspective of, what does my client need to understand? Because that's really what it comes down to. And you can set yourself apart in this industry to a great degree by being excellent at appraisal review, because there's a huge need for it. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, appraisal review reports are checkbox, 5 words, and it leaves more questions for the underwriter.
Absolutely. I'm actually in the process of writing a review course, and I hope to have that done. Boy, I'm a slow writer. I'm a talker. I'm not much of a writer. So it takes me forever to write, but I am in the process of developing a review, appraisal review course. And we'll eventually offer that online through Appraiser eLearning. I'll also be offering that in live venues across the country. So I'm excited about that. You mentioned earlier something about taking something to become designated, I believe, as a reviewer.
Yes.
Earlier. Go ahead and share with that if somebody else was interested in doing that.
Yeah. So I was designated a few years ago with the Appraisal Institute. So I'm an SRA.
Okay.
And so that takes, that takes a number of classes, in-person classes, demonstration of knowledge, experiences reviewed, and so on, and samples. And then I need to take a few more classes. I'm actually down to 1 class, and that's the very last step. All my review experiences turned in, everything's, but I just need to take 1 class, and that's for the RRS, if I'm remembering it correctly, for the Appraisal Institute review designation. And I'm really excited to get to that class. But, really setting yourself apart. You talked about taking classes that actually further your knowledge. That's just an example of, hey, look, don't just take the CE course for the number. Take the CE course for the content and really go forward. Review is so important now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sometimes the oddball in a class because I've been in classes and they say, stand up, introduce yourself, and tell me why you're here. And, of course, everybody's standing up saying CE, 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 CE. I stand up and I say, gosh, I'm here for the education. I've got plenty of CE hours. I don't need hours. I'm trying to learn something. I have a thirst for knowledge. I'll also let folks know that the National Association of Appraisers has a review certification program where you can become a certified review appraiser from the NAA, which that's very cool. So you can check out with them for that process. Well, Jeff, we're running out of time, but before we completely run out of time, I got to know, all right, you're telling me that somebody might be looking at my report years later. Okay. So,
yes.
so that gets my attention a little bit, right? I can't remember what I had for dinner last night, more or less what I did years ago. So give me some examples where I might be a little nervous that somebody calls me on something that I did years ago. How does that come
Right.
into play? What is that about?
So it's really important to remember that a lender does need to look at every report, but they're not going to perform an ultimate appraisal review on everything. They're looking at a lot of risk factors. So sometimes they're not looking at report A like they would as at report B. So sometimes something goes through and they're saying, yeah, it meets these minimum requirements. There's no other risk factors. Okay, we believe this and we'll put this in our loan file. Well, let's say that loan goes bad in 4 years. And then the investor that they sold it to looks at it and says, hey, wait a second. They didn't do X, Y, or Z, which are required for HUD, for FHA, or are required by Fannie Mae, which we said were requirements of us buying this loan, and so on. So now what happens is there's a buyback. They push it back to the lender. They say, you know what? No, you need to basically, pay us back for this. We're not holding this loan. You're going to hold this loan now.
Right.
And the lender may come back to an appraiser and say, you know what? You didn't do X, Y, or Z. Certainly when in the downturn 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, we did see situations where maybe the appraisal was the scapegoat, but there were many legitimate claims made against appraisers because of the appraisal report. So the key would be keep a good work file. If you are contacted by someone years down the road because of a buyback situation or whatever the situation is, do contact appropriate folks, maybe an attorney, maybe your E&O. I'm not going to give anyone legal advice, but there are many cases where it may be in the best interest of an appraiser to at least hear what they're saying and take a look at what's going on, because you want to know if there might be a problem for you where a party is looking to recover a loss. So it's a legitimate, there are many legitimate times. I saw one was kind of communicated to me the other day, sharing some experiences, and it was a manufactured house had been appraised as a stick built, and no one knew it until 4 or 5 years. I don't remember how long they were telling me, but no one had caught it because other risk factors were low enough. They didn't scrutinize everything. They didn't send it out for appraisal review and things like this. And it can be a problem. So that's just one example. But there are legitimate cases, but always do your homework, keep your ears open before you talk, and then go to appropriate folks who you believe will help guide you appropriately in those cases. So.
Yeah, I had a request from a private mortgage insurer. Actually, it was the criminal investigative unit for a private mortgage insurer. Now, why would a criminal investigative unit for a private mortgage insurance company hire me to do reviews on something that was done years ago? And they had two for me. One of them was out at the Summit, which is a golf course community. I mean, we struggle as appraisers to do these great big houses. And so I looked at it, and honestly, I mean, it was a challenging assignment. I really didn't see anything wrong. The other one was a small 3-bedroom, 1-bath ranch style house in a little subdivision. And the appraiser only used one sale in the neighborhood. Now, maybe they had a reason. They certainly didn't explain why. The comp number one, the report said no garage. And when you drive by, and the picture was taken at this angle, but if you go look at it at this angle, there's a big old 2-car garage out back. Now, maybe that was an honest mistake. Maybe they missed it, but their data source and their verification source did reflect it. So there were certainly some red flags. Went outside the neighborhood for the other two comparables, and there were 5 other sales in the neighborhood. No explanation of why those weren't considered. There were just some red flags. So that one didn't really get a clean bill of health, if you will, like the first one did. And I don't know what happened to that, but yeah. So them coming back years later, guys, it happens. So you need to do the best job you can. Josh, we're at the 11 o'clock hour. We're done, buddy. And I hate that we're done, because I could sit all day chatting on some of these topics. Hey, if somebody wants to reach out to you privately or has some questions for you, how could somebody get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can actually reach out to me at my business email, and that's jwalitt@propertyinterlink.com. So that's JWALITT@propertyinterlink.com. And you can find me under Josh Walitt, WALITT on LinkedIn if you didn't get that email down.
Very good. Well, Josh, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be a guest on the show. Hopefully we can have you back again in the very near future.
I'd love that. Thank you for having me.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. I'm Bryan Reynolds with the Appraisal Report webinar hosted by Appraiser eLearning. Be sure to come back and check us out again. Until then, happy appraising. See you soon.